we're not really from here. You know, it's interesting, people's fascination with Martians and like extraterrestrial life is very interesting. And some, you know, even think, oh, maybe the Martians are down here. The Martians are down here. The aliens are here. And the aliens are the Jewish people. The Jewish people aren't really from here. We're from some kind of a spiritual reality that's a, you know, multi-leveled spiritual plane that exists in places that, you know, you just would never even understand. I'm not going to go into a deep Kabbalistic class right now, but let's just say that there are 5 levels to the soul of a Jewish people. One is called the Yechida, one's called the Chaya, one's called the Neshama, one's called the Ruach, one's called the Nefesh. Each one of those has myriads of gradations, and they're juxtaposed to the actual spiritual worlds, which are parallel worlds that basically filter out the infinite light that God creates the world with. So the highest one, the part that I called the Yechida, is part of Nefesh Kadmon. The next world is called Atzilus, that's our Chaya. The next world's called Beriah, that is our Neshama. The next world's called Yetzira, and that's our Ruach. And then the next world's called Asiyah. And we are actually at the very, very bottom of Asiyah, the bottom of the barrel of Asiyah. That's our physical world. And your Nefesh, which has multiple levels like all the others do, at the very, very, very end of all those levels is like basically the white of my fingernail, that little tiny white of the edge of my fingernail. That would represent the very end of the Nefesh, that part of the Jewish soul, which USB cable clicks, click, into the brain. And then the Jew is like, hey, I'm in this world. Oh my gosh, a physical world. And, but Jews, and I hope this is true about you, but it could be you're brainwashed at this point, but Jews are supposed to feel totally alienated in this world because we're not from here. 99.999% of us is in this upper realm. It's only that thinnest membrane that clicks in to this world. So you're not even really from here. That's why Jews have 365 negative commandments, which translate into about 30,000 laws of what we're not to do here. Why? Because as long as you honor those 365 negative commandments, you won't get stuck here. You won't wind up getting trapped in the matrix. You will remain footloose, fancy free, and able to do your work in this world. And what is the work of a Jew? The work of a Jew is Aliyah. It's to raise up the sparks of everything, of mineral, of vegetable, of animal, of human, and we're basically like coal miners mining out this world in order to ultimately sustain it. Because when a Jew does his work or her work in this world, we are actually causing a flow, divine flow, from that infinite light into the physical world in order to vivify, in order to sustain the mineral, vegetable, animal, Gentile, Jewish, and all the above spiritual realms, which have their own entities, which are called malachim, to actually sustain them. So we've got serious work in this world. The Jewish people are here to do very serious work. And you don't even have to understand it so well. All you have to do is avoid those 365, do the positive commandments, and when it comes to things that are neutral, meaning they're not forbidden, they're not commandments, meaning positive commandments, to go do something, all that neutral stuff, like a slice of pizza, as long as it's kosher, is to raise it up with the blessings you make and to do acts of kindness to teach the world about the brotherhood of humanity, to make the world a better place, to protect it and serve. Protect the garden and serve to make it grow. That's what we're here for, and not to get trapped up in it. Well, you'll notice something very interesting throughout the Torah. Well, one of the things the Torah tells us is that we are going to either do that job or we're going to be chased after, we're going to be attacked, we're going to be basically annihilated. Not completely annihilated, but we will deal with anti-Semitism, the great curse. That throughout every generation, and the Torah even says that in every generation, this arch-evil people called Amalek will come up against us. And it actually says the word, lo tishkach, never forget, which is so interesting that after the Holocaust, that, you know, I didn't grow up with these babies, so I grew up in more of a cultural, you know, Judaism that it was always shoved down our throat. Never forget, never forget. It was like, why are you telling us that? You're preaching to the choir. We won't forget what they did to us in the Holocaust. But really, that message should have gone to the Gentiles. They should never forget, so they would never do it again. But of course, that falls on deaf ears, because the whole mechanism of the Gentiles is that if the Jews aren't doing their job, then the Gentiles get to do their job. And their job is to remind us what we're here for, because it's for them in the end. They're the ones getting ripped off. It's even brought down that every single Jew has a certain amount of Gentiles that he's sustaining in this world. Now, if the Gentiles knew which Jew that was, they just go after that Jew. But since they don't know who he is, so they just go after Jews in general. Just anti-Semitism just comes out, you know, randomly against the Jews, because in the end, the Gentiles realize they're getting ripped off. This story goes all the way back to Jacob, when Jacob basically stole the blessing from his father Isaac. So Isaac, you know, he gave the blessing to Jacob, but then immediately his brother Esau, who's the grandfather of Amalek, comes in and says, "What about me, Daddy? What about my blessing?" And he lets out a terrible scream. "What happened to my blessing?" And Isaac's like, "I'm sorry, you know, I already gave it to your brother Jacob." And he said, like, "You don't have any blessing left for me." And then he gives him a blessing that he'll live by the sword and many other blessings of prosperity. And if you look at the commentary there, it says that when the Jews aren't doing their job, Esau gets his blessing. That's when Esau is blessed. When the Jews aren't doing his job, they'll prosper and they'll live by their sword. In other words, they're going to come after Jacob. And that has been all of history. Now, you want to hear something amazing. You would think in the Torah that clearly prophesizes the demise of the Jews and constant death, to the point where it mentions several times that the Torah mentions several times that the Jews will remain few in number. Well, how's that going to happen? I mean, do you know that there were more Jews at Mount Sinai than there were Chinese people in China at the same exact year of Mount Sinai? So there should be like billions of Jews, but nevertheless, all the years, it always came true that 13 million, 14 million, 16 million, 17 million, we never grew beyond that. We're like 0.001 of the population of the world for all of history. So it's really, really an interesting thing that we remain few in number. Well, obviously, one of the mechanisms is that they constantly wipe us out, you know, and we even lost a third of our people 70 years ago. Now, the Torah seems to talk a lot about the death of Jews. Well, what about the death of Gentiles? Where is that in the Torah? Well, I want to hear something really interesting. The Torah doesn't really bring up the death of Gentiles much at all. I mean, it talks about them being humbled. It talks about them being scared in many different languages. In Hebrew, there's a lot of languages for you know, ema, pachad. You know, there's a lot of words for fear, meaning for like trembling in awe. Well, the Torah seems to not want the death of the Gentiles. So it's pretty liberal about the death of the Jews, but when it comes to Gentiles, no. It seems like it's, you know, even when the Jews were commanded to conquer the land of Israel from the 7 Canaanite nations, which was a commandment to, you know, the Exodus, the 40 years in the desert, and then to conquer the land of Israel, these are commanded, you know, facts that the Jews had to do. So the first thing was to offer them to leave peacefully, not to kill them. And you see in Egypt that until the killing of the firstborn, it wasn't to kill them. Well, look what happens. Moses is sent to Egypt to get the Jews out. And, you know, immediately the Jews get much worse labor, meaning Pharaoh the king, he made the Jews labor even harder because of Moses. So the Jews were like, what have you done to us, Moses? But the king himself, Pharaoh, says to Moses, who is this God that I should know him? And so Moses goes to God. He says, this is not working out, not for the Jews and not for the Egyptians. All you're doing is making more trouble. And God said, the whole point is that the Egyptians shall know me. Now, what is this world? This world isn't the world for the Jews. This world is the world of the Gentiles. It's their world. It's their world. The physical world is for the Gentile people so that they can live in this world and thrive. And the Jews are a big, big part of enabling that to happen spiritually, because it's not a physical world. The world's coming from absolute nothingness into somethingness, from infinite to finite. That flow is done via the Jewish people. But what's the point? Why did God give this giant video game to the Gentiles? In order to make his name great. Well, Gentiles, they're matched to this world. They don't have the same depression and angst and restlessness that Jews have, because we don't belong here and we know it deep down. Gentiles are cool with this place. They get along. It clicks, they like this place. But the problem is they think this place is real. They think this is it. And really, God is inside of every single molecule of this world. Even if my voice right now is 440 oscillations, that's 440 ones. And if the light's shining on me right now are 6,000 oscillations per second, well, that's 6,000 ones. He's the one inside of everything in this world, which is all made ultimately of vibration. It's all made of, things moving, atoms moving, which is all mathematics. And he's the one inside of that, except the Gentiles, who are perfectly matched to this physical world, they think they're home. They're not home. Home is God. God is the reality. And when they realize that, just like Egypt, but even much greater, see, in Egypt with the 10 plagues, God flipped over the natural world so that they would see, oh my gosh, there's something else is at play here. There's other rules than we realized are running this place. So it's brought down by the prophet Micha that the wonders that happen in Egypt will be nothing compared to the wonders that are going to happen on the whole globe. And it's going to be the whole globe. And that's one of the reasons we have internet and this global village we're in, where everyone can see what's going on in every part of the world. Someone asked me recently, why didn't God save the Jews of the Holocaust? I said, because it was too localized. That wasn't the time of the Messiah. Because had it happened there that God saved the Jewish people in the Eastern Europe, well, who would have been privy to that? Just the people witnessing it in Eastern Europe. It would have been just a story. And as you know, stories fade. Rather, instead, the Messianic Era is going to happen for the planet. Egypt was a localized redemption, but there's going to be a planetary redemption. It's going to happen over this entire globe. And now we're poised for it because we're living in the global village where it can take place. This is the time for that. So what are these words, don't forget? What are the words never forget that are in our Torah that got shoved down our throat after the Holocaust? They actually are for the Jewish people, and specifically for the Jewish people who are no longer affiliated or were raised with, no real content in their Jewish education. Why? Because when Jews assimilate, well, they assimilate very powerfully, because Jews are pretty powerful people, and they'll just totally become part of this world. As we know, Jews are at every industry. They're at the top of every industry because they bit fully into the apple. They went for all of this world. And these Jews who are fully in this world, they, after a while, think just like the Gentiles, that that's all there is. There is nothing else. There's no God. God is not. They became atheists maybe even faster than Gentiles do. And so what's the never forget about? The never forget motto is that when the Gentiles rise up and say, hey, Jew, and they go, things go anti-Semitism again, and on a global level. So what happens is they're like, never forget. Never forget. What does that mean, never forget? Never forget who you are. Never forget that God created this place. Never forget that you have a job in this world. And if they're coming after you for being Jewish and you don't know what the hell that means, well, start studying. Go online. Start discovering. Find a local rabbi who actually keeps Torah and let him teach you. Go to Shabbos tables. Find out how to start keeping kosher. Like, what a waste to get killed for being a Jew who doesn't act like a Jew. Like, if they're killing you for being a Jew, be the best damn Jew you ever met. And how do you do that? Slowly. Slowly grow. Learn this, do that. Learn that, do this. Just keep growing and growing and growing. But what will happen is the opposite. You're not going to be killed for being a Jew. The opposite, the Gentiles will realize that, hey, there's a Jew who's actually keeping Judaism. There's a Jew who's actually sustaining us spiritually, physically, materially. This is exactly the kind of Jew that is like keeping the world going. And so that is our goal in this world, is to realize that we are the Jewish people, to bring a light unto the world. The Gentiles are the people of the world. And the last thing I'd like to share with you is just that the Holy Land is a very interesting term. The Jews and the Torah and all of that were created for the Jews to live in the Holy Land. And the word Holy Land in Hebrew, it's Eretz HaKodesh. It's a very interesting word because land, Eretz, represents physicality. And of course, Kodesh, holy, that represents spirituality. So if you think about it, the word Holy Land is an oxymoron. Is it physical or is it spiritual? Is it this world or is it that world? And the answer is, it's the Holy Land. And the Holy Land is the only place where the Jewish people can ever feel at home. Because we're not from here, but there's a Holy Land. And in that geographical, biblical area that was given to Moses, it was given to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and ultimately to Moses and the Jewish people when they went into the land, with each tribe in their location, in their ancestral portion of the land. That's the place where the Jews can actually be in the physical world and feel at home. And so the call to Israel, as we all know, it started obviously with a secular movement, with the original secular Zionists, the Jews that were not observant, who developed that whole movement back to the land. Well, you should know that it wasn't really them who started it. This all began with great Kabbalists over 300 years ago, who internationally had, at the same time, without knowing each other, without even knowing each other existed, Kabbalistic leaders of the Jewish people, great mystics throughout the world, sent their students to the land of Israel. The original Aliyah, the original ascension to Israel, began with very observant Jews who felt the calling over 300 years ago. And it was from Yemen, it was from Iraq, it was from Iran, it was from Morocco, it was from the Ukraine and all these areas of Eastern Europe. They sent their students to Israel because that was the beginning of the redemption of this planet. We are all in various stages of this happening, and it's really happening. So get involved, do something, learn something, and let's begin to understand the world we live in so that we will be able to survive and thrive through this Messianic process that we are in. Blessings and love.